World Geography. Basics of Geography. Population. Here are the learning objectives for this video. Number 1. Name and define important population statistics and graphics, particularly things like the Human Development Index and population pyramids. Number 2. Describe the connection between early river valley civilizations and modern urbanization. Number 3. What is the relationship between population density and industrialization? Number 4. Identify the structure of an urban area. Number 5. Name several push and pull factors determining migration. Introduction. Increasing population. If you look back to the American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, world population was around 800 million. Since that time, due to advances in healthcare and agriculture, the population of the world is around 7 billion today. Accompanying this increase in population is things like mass migration to cities and increased population density where people live closer to one another, maybe in high-rise apartments and things like that. And there's also been an increase in the standard of living. Statistical measurement. Geographers collect statistical data and use certain demographic terms to measure progress and describe the future. Population measures. Industrialization. Industrialization is the process of building factories and manufacturing products in these factories. This is a much more efficient way to manufacture a product than to make things by hand. This process of industrialization has really increased the wealth of the world. And so, as the world industrialized, beginning in the late 1700s, people began to grow more nutritious food. They had new machines out on the farm that could harvest crops at a much faster rate. And also people began applying science to develop improved sanitation methods and better health care. These advances in sanitation and health care and better nutrition, this led to more young women reaching childbearing age, and then this added to the increasing numbers of children in the population. And of course, population growth soared. Demographers. A population geographer is called a demographer, and this type of person studies aspects of the population like birth and death rates, distribution, and density. They look at and they calculate several different statistics. Let's look at some of them. Birth statistics. Birth rate. This is a simple statistic. It just refers to the number of live births per 1,000 people in the population. Fertility rate. This is the average number of children that a woman of childbearing years would have in her lifetime. If you want to replace the current population, then the fertility rate has to at least be 2.1. That's because it takes 2 adults to make a child. And you need a little bit over 2.0 because some children die at childbirth. At present, the worldwide fertility rate is 3.0. Death statistics. Mortality rate. This refers to the number of deaths per 1,000 population. If you have a low mortality rate, where not many people are dying, then this usually indicates a healthy society. Infant mortality rate. This refers to the number of deaths among infants under age 1 per 1,000 live births. A high infant mortality rate, this would be a country without very good health care, without very good prenatal care for women so that children are born healthy. Growth statistics. The rate of natural increase. This is the rate at which the population is growing. You get this rate by subtracting the mortality rate from the birth rate. Very simple. Life expectancy. This refers to the average age that a person in a given population can expect to live. Human Development Index. The Human Development Index, or HDI, compares countries across 3 areas. First, you look at life expectancy. Then you look at the mean years of schooling. How many years of schooling do people have in this particular country? And then you look at standard of living. And this is measured by gross national income. Gross national income is nothing more than a country's wealth and their economic production. So the higher the HDI ranking means the less inequality between rich and poor that you're going to find in that particular country. Population pyramid. A population pyramid, this is a graphic device. I'll show you an example in just a moment. And it shows the sex, or the gender, and the age distribution of a population. Geographers use population pyramids to examine how world events like wars and famines and epidemics, like the HIV epidemic, how this might affect the population of a country or region. Here's a graphic of a population pyramid. It might be a good idea to pause here, go through the steps on the left-hand side, and then look at the population pyramid at the top in order to understand its different elements, how it's made up. Basically, you have males on one side, females on the other. You have an age range from 0 to up to 80 plus. In ranges of about 5 years each. And you have bars, and the bars represent how many people are in that age group. So if you have a range of, say, 0 to 4, then you look at the bar to determine how many millions of people, male and female, are in that age range. And you can find the millions of people on the x-axis on the bottom. Here's an example of a population pyramid. This is the United States 2000 and the United States as projected in 2050. On the population pyramid on the left, you see a little bulge kind of in the middle for the people that are in their 50s. And what explains that bulge is that when men returned from World War II back in 1945, 1950, they were inclined to have children and big families. We had won the war, there was prosperity, so it was normal to have 2 or 3 children at that time. So you find a lot of people in that generation called the baby boom. By 2050, you're going to see that this baby boom has been kind of smoothed out, and people are starting to have just an average of the 2.1 children. Here are 3 population pyramids. One on the left is the Democratic Republic of Congo. Lots of children, not many old people at the top. It's very narrow at the top. It's a war, that's a society where probably there's a lot of war and adults are being killed. There's not good health care. They die when they go to the hospital. Usually indicative of kind of a poor country, a population pyramid that has a really large bottom like that. The middle one is the United States, and it's a slow growth. Every bar is about the same length and not much going on there. And then to the far right is Germany, and this is negative population growth, where they're definitely having less than 2.1 children per family. And so you find the population of Germany actually shrinking when you have and you can see this reflected in the population pyramid itself. Human settlement. Agriculture. Anthropologists, they believe that humans first appeared in the Great Rift Valley in East Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. Humans later spread through migration to other regions throughout the world. About 10,000 years ago, people in the Middle East, they discovered that they could plant seeds to grow their own food crops. This was the discovery of agriculture. Very important, because people no longer needed to roam around to find their food on a daily basis. They could stay in one place and grow their crops. No need to follow the nomadic lifestyle anymore. River Valley civilizations. Agriculture was particularly successful in river valleys, in places like Egypt, the Nile River, Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates River, India, China. All these places had fertile soil from annual flooding. Due to abundant harvests, cities arose in these early river valley civilizations. The surplus food, the extra food that they could store in granaries, this now allowed urban populations to specialize in different trades. So there could be priests and soldiers and traders. Not everybody had to go out and search for food every day. There was extra. These urban populations continued to grow, and then a need for government developed. You have more people, you have to have some rules that Here's a map of the major river valley civilizations. Cultural hearth. We refer to these early river valley civilizations, we say that they are cultural hearths because these are areas where innovation spread from. Urbanization. In the 1700s, the Industrial Revolution, industrialization, it increased the speed of urbanization. Factories were being built and people would move to live near the factory to work, and cities would spring up around these new factories. And the cities got larger and larger. People left the rural countryside for jobs. Cities also grew where goods were exchanged or transferred. This could be at seacoast ports, or where two rivers might meet, or where railroad lines crossed. Population distribution. Where people live. People are actually distributed unevenly across the earth because not all lands are suitable for human habitation. The climate, altitude, how high up you are in the mountains, access to water, all these things influence where people live. 2/3 of the world's population actually live in the northern temperate zone, above the equator, between 20 degrees north and 60 degrees north latitude. This area has a climate that's warm enough and wet enough to make agriculture possible. People do not live in polar regions or mountains or deserts. Rural to urban shift. At this time, more than half the world's population still live in rural areas. However, increasing numbers of people have moved to the cities or are in the process of moving to cities. In these cities, there's a high demand for water and sanitation. Population density. Population density statistics. The term population density, this is the average number of people who live in a measurable area, such as a square mile. This number is derived by dividing the number of inhabitants in the area by the total amount of land that they occupy. However, because population is not distributed evenly across the land, this number can be a little misleading for an entire nation. Carrying capacity statistics. So, since population density can be a little bit misleading, we often use the term carrying capacity, and this refers to the number of organisms that a piece of land can support. If a region has fertile soil, it can support far more people than a region with poor quality land, or an area that has little land available for cultivation. Maybe an area like Japan, where it has many mountains, but really not very many places to grow crops. You can increase carrying capacity by using improved farm techniques like irrigation and fertilizers and mechanized farm equipment. Lack of arable land. There are other things that can allow a region with low carrying capacity to support a large number of people. If we look at the very, very small city-state nation of Singapore, it has a high population density, but little arable land. So people in Singapore support themselves through business activities like international finance and shipping. And then they import food to support their large population with the money they make from these activities. Population density maps. Geographers measure patterns of settlement by using particular maps. These are thematic maps, show the distribution of a population. You can either use a dot population map, where each dot represents a certain number of residents, or perhaps you might use a map that shows patterns and colors. And that demonstrates where people may live in a given area. There's usually a key that explains what those patterns or colors mean. Here's a couple of examples of these maps. First, population dot map. And then a density map using shading instead, showing the population density. Population trends. Science and population. World population was very uneven. Population would increase and decrease just dramatically. And this was the case until agriculture was introduced. Famines, plagues, and wars up to this time pretty much kept population growth in check. However, during the Industrial Revolution, when manufacturing increased dramatically and the amount of food increased dramatically because of the scientific methods being applied to farming, in areas like Europe and North America, science began to even decrease death rates. And the population accelerated almost 10 times in Great Britain, and average birth rates decreased. People started having less children when they moved to the city in general. They couldn't support a family of 10 in the city like they could when they were on the farm. Population explosion. As the Europeans colonized new regions, medical advances, and new farming methods, these diffused or spread worldwide. The Europeans may have invented a lot of these things, but these inventions or innovations in farming, they spread to every country around the world. And even in English colonies, people began to live longer. However, people in these colonies did not immediately decrease their birth rates. And so there was a population explosion in areas like Asia and Africa and Latin America. And that's starting to decrease now. Growth of urban areas. Process of urbanization. Nowadays, people move into cities from rural areas because cities are the birthplace of innovation and change. They're where what's interesting is kind of happening. Urban areas. Urban areas developed around the central city. This built-up area around the central city, as you leave the downtown area, it can include suburbs. And a suburb is a political unit that touches the border of the central city or the downtown region, or it may touch other suburbs that touch the city. Exurbs are smaller cities or towns with open land between them and the central city. So if you drive out from, say, Dallas, you'll go through the suburbs of Duncanville and Cedar Hill. And then if you travel further south, you get to Ennis. And Ennis is kind of connected to the Dallas region, but there's some open land between Ennis and Dallas, so that's an exurb. City, suburbs, and exurbs, they link together to form a functional area called the metropolitan area. And if you have several of these metropolitan areas coming together, where you don't really see a difference between one and the other, this is a megalopolis. Migration. Push and pull. Migration is the permanent movement of people from one area to the other. Geographers divide the reasons for migration into push and pull factors. Push factors are those events that push people out of their old location. Pull factors attract or lure migrants to a new location. People may migrate due to a combination of push and pull factors. We'll discuss some of them now. Social migration factors. Religious minorities might leave a place if they face persecution for their religious beliefs. After all, this is why the Pilgrims left England and migrated to the United States. Particular ethnic groups may also flee persecution. Economic migration factor. Extreme poverty often causes people to leave their homelands, especially if they hear that conditions are better elsewhere. So immigrants, they come to the United States in search of new economic opportunities. These economic motives may be strengthened by social ones if they already have family members here in the United States that have migrated. Environmental migration factor. People may migrate due to environmental conditions. In some areas of Africa, a tribe may migrate from one region to another so they can take their cows from one grassland area to a new one. So they may migrate due to the seasons. Changes in environment, like cooling and rising temperatures or droughts, this can lead people to migrate. And environmental catastrophes, like hurricanes, like Hurricane Katrina, or an earthquake, this may force people to migrate. Forced migration, another migration factor. Forced migration accompanies war and the persecution of people. For instance, the removal of Native American Indians to reservations, this was forced migration. Natural barriers. Mountains, deserts, dense forests, these may be natural barriers to migration, or they can shape its course. For instance, in North America, for many years, people just lived on the East Coast in the earliest history of this country. They couldn't really make it over the Appalachian Mountains. And then when they made it over the Appalachian Mountains, they pushed westward towards the Rocky Mountains, and once again, it kind of stood in their way. It slowed down the migration. On the African continent, you have the Sahara Desert, and the Sahara limits migration between North Africa and what's called Sub-Saharan Africa, or the part of Africa below the Sahara. Generally, people choose to migrate through valleys or along water routes, but that was traditionally. Now they mostly use airplanes, actually. The end. Thank you for listening.